Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar about how to plan and finance your family's college dream. My name is Sarah Speltz, and I'm an Assistant Director in the BU Alumni Relations Office. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Boston University Alumni Association and is offered as part of our Live to Learn Alumni Education Program. Many of our educational programs are held on campus, but we plan to offer more educational webinars because we want to connect with our alumni around the globe. And I know we have alumni joining us today from near and far, with participants in more than 20 different US states and 4 countries. Today we also want to extend a special welcome to the BU parents who are joining us. For each of you out there, please know that we are thrilled you're taking time to participate in this online program. We do invite you to answer one more question before I turn things over to our presenter. So I'm going to end the poll that we have right now. I see a lot of you already voted. That's great. Thank you. And I'm just going to switch to a different one. All right. Well, I do a little more introduction if you want to answer this next question. We have a few housekeeping notes. As you know, this webinar is being hosted on the Adobe Connect online meeting platform. If you experience any trouble with the audio or visual portions of this presentation, please contact Adobe Connect at 1-800-422-3623. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be available for on-demand viewing on the BU Alumni Association website, found at bu.edu/alumni. Our speaker today is eager to answer any questions you have, and you are welcome to submit them throughout the presentation using the Q&A chat box you see located below the slide. We hope to get to as many of the questions as we can during this webinar. So I'm just going to give you 30 more seconds to answer this question here, and then I will introduce our speaker. Thank you all so much for participating. All right, go ahead and keep answering if you like. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter who is presenting from Massachusetts. His name is John Hupalo. John is a nationally recognized expert in education loan finance and private credit student loans. In 2012, he founded Invite Education to empower families with the information, tools, and services they need to guide them to better college fits academically and financially. His education-focused career spans more than 30 years as a legislative assistant on Capitol Hill, managing director on Wall Street, CFO of a publicly traded education finance company, and now is an entrepreneur. He has also served on a school board, chaired an alumni association council, founded and ran a volunteer not-for-profit to raise money for the homeless, and has been a trustee and treasurer for a grade 1 through 9 school for children with language-based learning issues. On June 14th, Peterson's published Plan and Finance Your Family's College Dream, a parent's step-by-step guide from pre-K to senior year, which he wrote with his co-author and co-founder of Invite Education, Dr. Peter Mazarius. John received his BA with honors in 1982 from Boston University and an MBA in finance from New York University's Stern School of Business in 1987. John, thanks again for being with us today. I'm going to turn things over to you, and it will take me just a second to bring up your slideshow. But the floor is yours.
Well, Sarah, thank you very much. Thank you also to your colleagues at the Boston University Office of Development and Alumni Relations for bringing this important topic to all of our fellow alums. And I'm very happy now to be here and have an opportunity to provide this webinar. Sarah, I'm not seeing the screens here. There we go.
It might be at the end.
Yeah, it looks like we're at the very back. But let me thank you all for joining the seminar while we're working through this technical issue. We all know that planning and paying for college is a hot topic in the media. And as we're seeing, households from around the world, not just locally, are very interested in this particular topic. What I'd love to be able to do today is give you some food for thought about how to think about this topic. I saw from the poll that the majority of participants on the line today have high school freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, so you're involved in this process. I am very honored, frankly, to have this opportunity. As Sarah mentioned, I've had a career focused on education finance in one form or another, either professionally or through my side interest. But the last bullet on this screen, the father of two high school graduates, is what really motivated me and pushed me into starting Invite Education and eventually writing this book that we're going to tell you about. And the reason for that epiphany, if you will, is that professionally it's very easy to give other people advice about what they should be doing with their businesses or how they should be planning for college or what activity they should be undertaking. But the reality is it's a whole different story, as you all know or now finding out, when it's your child and it's your money and it's their dreams and it's your family's ambition to have them successful in their careers, and most importantly, successful first as college students. So in our book, we call that the daily double of parental fragility. Planning college hits the two hot button issues that as parents we are most concerned about. One is our kids and their dreams, and the second is our scarce finances. So this book and the software program that Invite Education created are intended to provide a plain English guide to all of the important issues that we as parents deal with when we have a child with a dream to go to college. So much of what I'll talk about today are discussed in the book in a lot more detail or at inviteeducation.com. I hope you'll find these resources useful, and please send us your feedback. Before I get to these hot topics, though, let me just say that as alumnus of Boston University and all on the phone, we should be very proud of what Boston University has been able to accomplish. When you look at Boston University by the numbers, it's really a pattern of consistent excellence. The sticker price at the school, about $65,000, not the most expensive, but of course not the cheapest school around. But we should be proud that about half of the class receives substantial amount of financial aid, so that the net price of attending Boston University is actually under $35,000 for a majority of students. Secondly, the acceptance rate and the yield rate is quite high and in good place. Acceptance rates, of course, there are some schools that are extremely stingy in their acceptances, very parochial, if you will, in that view, at 5 or 10%. But we have a very significant acceptance rate, meaning that we're not terribly exclusive, but we're not an open enrollment school by any stretch either. But now we're getting into the next few statistics that I think really speak so well for the university. One is that the average amount of federal loan debt that our students are taking is about $27,000, but their default rate on that debt is extremely low, less than 2%, when the national average is over 11%. So I think we're doing a great job in that area. Also, the 6-year graduation rate, and hopefully nobody on the phone is shocked when we know that we're quoting 6-year graduation rates, but the reality is that many students take more than 4 years, but our students do exceptionally well. 85% of those who enter actually graduate within 6 years, which is double the national average of 6-year graduates. So it's a really impressive statistic. And the last one that I will highlight here is the undergraduate bachelor salaries are very high. If you look 10 years after entering school, our average BA candidate is making almost $60,000, and that's significantly greater than the average. And for the fresh outs, those 0 to 5 years outs, about $52,000, telling us that their investment on their education at Boston University is really significant, and it's good. I am frequently asked the question of how much student loan debt is too much, and I'm sure some of you on the phone now are contemplating that as well. There's a terrific rule of thumb which says that the first year starting salary should be greater than the total and I emphasize the word total amount of debt that a student is taking, so for all 4 years, not just 1 year. But when you look at BU by the numbers and you see an average federal loan debt rate of about $27,000 and a starting salary of nearly, or 5-year out salary of $60,000, we're really doing quite well. Low default rate, salaries in excess of debt by almost 2 to 1. That tells me that a large majority of Boston University students are landing on their feet after college. I wanted to just spend a minute to talk to you about Felix Baumgartner. He landed on his feet, and the question is, will our children? And we know many BU students do, but how will our students do? Felix Baumgartner is an Australian daredevil. He participated in the Red Bull Stratus project, and what he did was to ride a helium balloon made out of plastic, actually less dense than a plastic bag. He rode this helium balloon 24 miles into the stratosphere, about 127,852 feet. Actually, last Friday, the 14th, was his 4th anniversary of this feat, and you should Google this, but I want to tell you why I'm pointing this out. This is a picture of Felix as he stepped out onto the platform of this balloon. He said, "I'm going home now," and then casually leaned over the side to begin his descent. And what a descent that was. He was in free fall for 4 minutes and 19 seconds. His top speed was 843.6 miles per hour. That's Mach 1.25. He caused a sonic boom by himself, the first person ever to break the sound barrier without the aid of a vehicle. The engineers also told him that it was highly likely that at some point in his fall, he would actually spin into a death spiral. So they practiced, and they told him how he could remove himself from this death spiral with some movements, and he was able to right himself, deploy his parachute, and now the punchline: he proceeded to land on his feet. And I thought, this is now 2012, just at the point when I was thinking about what Invite Education could do to help parents and students. I thought to myself, how is it that this guy jumped from 128,000 feet, landed on his feet, but we can't seem to get students to graduate from college without excessive debt? And it was really a motivating factor for me to think hard about what we could do. It spawned Invite Education and the book that I showed you. And I really started to dig into this whole issue of what resources parents need to help as we're beginning the whole process of planning and paying for college. So now I'll get into the meat of the presentation. I wanted that second poll about what you were interested in talking about, and the majority of you talked and said that college application process is interesting but not the highlight, but really talk about the financial aid process and how to save for college. And knowing that the majority of the group that's with us today are also parents of high school freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, we'll make sure that we emphasize those topics. The 7 question words, as Sarah said at the beginning, I'm a graduate of the College of Arts and Sciences, better known to me as the College of Liberal Arts, in 1982 when I graduated. But as a CLA major, I was taught to focus on the 7 question words, so I thought that was a respectful way of honoring my BU education to start this presentation with the 7 question words. And the words are related to this whole issue of planning and paying for college. Who defines the college dream for the family? What is an affordable college? Why is there so much anxiety around this college process? Where do we turn for help? When should families start saving for college? Which savings plans work best? And how should families navigate the 2 college application processes? And I think that's hopefully not a revelation for many, but there are 2 processes. One has to do with admissions, and the other has to do with financial aid. So that's the frame of what our discussion will be today. And we'll start with this question of who defines the family's college dreams. And Sarah, if I could ask you to put up that last survey question. We have one more survey question that we did want to ask the group. And I've been asking this question whenever I speak. Sometimes I do some radio shows or some conferences. But the question is, what's more important when selecting a college? And I'd like your thoughts on this. Is it the academic and social fit? Is it the financial fit, meaning can you afford it? Are they equally important? Or are there other factors that we're not thinking about in this decision? So we'll close this poll in about a minute or so from now, but I appreciate you weighing in. The next slide really has to do with the question of what it is the questions rather, that we all face. And the significant factor in questions that a 12th grade family deals with are really pretty simple. And that is, can my student or the child, or if I'm the student, can I get into the college that I want? And second, can the family afford it? And that, when I thought about this back in 2011 and 2012, after having gone through this with Allison and Emily, my children, I realized that there was an awful lot of emotion that comes to play into these questions. But at the end of the day, that really is the frame. We have to answer two very simple questions. Can they get in, and can we afford it? The poll, Sarah, let's close the poll now. 63% say that academic social fit is as important as financial fit. And I think that that's a terrific revelation to talk about a little bit, because I believe that that's absolutely right. Too many times the press, I think, really focuses, and I was on actually a radio show with a professor who was arguing that he thought it was too bad that families were beginning to understand that affordability was a factor because they were losing out on the liberal arts and the academic part of college. But clearly, academic and social fit and financial fit are what it takes to have a successful career. When I ask about what the dream is the dream to attend college and get the education and also the ticket for success, or is the dream for the family to attend the most expensive school at all costs? And we hear all the time, and we read in the newspaper about how some families will dip into their retirement savings, or the parents will begin to take on an awful lot of debt to try to help their student attend the college of their dreams. And I do think it's worth stepping back in the food for thought column and asking that question, what is the dream? And I think the real dream should be to attend a college. And I think of it in terms sometimes of what a parent might do with a high school student when it comes to buying a new car. What parent in their right mind would say to their 18-year-old, why don't you go down to the car showroom and pick out any car you want. Don't worry about the cost. Just pick out the car of your dreams, and we'll figure out how to pay for it later. Nobody does that with a car as a consumer of automobiles, but many consumers of education, families, actually, in effect, say that to their high school students. Go pick out a college, the one of your dreams. We'll figure out how we can pay for it later. And that's just not a good equation. And I believe, frankly, that the debt crisis from 2007 and 8 and the realities of what's happened in the subsequent 10 years has really helped families think broadly about what it is that they can do to afford college and ensure that the fit question really does become a two-part question: academic and social fit, and then also, as we're saying, financial. So this question about college affordability is an interesting one, and if you Google it, you can go from some very complex quantitative definitions. The Lumina Foundation has their Rule of 10 that says if you know the net price of the college, it's affordable. if the student can meet the price by working 10 hours per week and also using 10% of the family's discretionary income that was saved over the last 10 years. That's, you need a calculator to do all that. There's this simple gut feel approach that's out there. Donald Heller, Michigan State, said, I think it's a lot like Justice Stewart's definition of obscenity. I'll know affordability when I see it. I'll stay on the high side of this and beg your indulgence and say that I have a practical definition about college affordability that I like to share. And that says, very simply, you don't need much of a calculator. All you need to know is how much savings you have. And this is not a time to be optimistic or pessimistic. It's time to be realistic. How much savings do you really have? How much gift might the student receive from an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, whoever it might be? How much income can I, as a parent, or the student when they're in school, how much will they be able to contribute each of those 4 years that the student's in school? And then also, how much estimated financial aid might I receive? And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there are ways to estimate that financial aid. So we should do that. And if you know how much free money is available, each one of those, if that's greater than the cost of the college, then there's no question it's affordable. Where some families run into some issues, though, is when the free money is less than the cost of the college and they're required to take on loans. And then that question again, how much for all 4 years? And that rule of thumb, total loans really need to be less than the expected starting salary. If those conditions are met, then again, I think we have an affordable school. And the other point that I always like to make here is that families have basically 100% control over the question of debt, an amount of debt that's being taken. The tricky part, of course, comes with the dreams of the college, where the students had a dream to go to a particular school. If it turns out it's outside of the range of affordability for a family, that's frankly when you begin to see the trouble start. And it's really an issue that needs to be dealt with in a realistic way. And my way of thinking about this is that the 2/3 of about all the defaults that occur in the student loan world result from non-completion of the academic program, which is really very significant. And loans less than $10,000 actually account for 2/3 of all the loan defaults. So these are low balance loans taken out by students who did not complete their academic program. And in my view, it's really tough because now you have a 21 or a 22-year-old who is in effect 0 for 2 right at the start of their life. They don't have a college degree and they have debt. That's why we hear so much in the popular press about this issue of completion and affordability. So why all the anxiety about the college process? I'll give you some quick statistics. We'll go through this fairly quickly. If you're reading the paper and you've been involved in this, you know that over the last 20 years, tuition has grown, outpaces inflation 2 or 3 to 1. Over the last 10-year period, tuition costs are up very, very significantly. Also, total student loans balances by age group. As we would expect, about 65% of all the debt is taken and now owned by folks under 40 years of age, which makes sense with 10 and 20-year repayment periods. But we also see those of us in our 50s and in our 60s also with some significant amounts of student loan debt. Most of it is not our own. Most of that is co-signed loans where we obligate ourselves to make good on the student's debt as a co-signer or potentially by taking one of the federal government's PLUS loans. So again, we see that this skews across all age groups from 60 plus right down to the under 30s. The other significant note here on the left scale, it says 1.2 billion, that's trillion then, $1.2 trillion, a number we hear a lot about in total outstanding education debt. It's a big number and it scares people, as it should. But I asked myself one day, actually, what does $1 trillion look like? And what $1 trillion looks like, this is a stack. These are $100 bills, if you can imagine this. A stack, if you go into a bank and you see a stack of hundreds, there are generally 100 $100 bills in that stack the teller has, and that's worth $10,000. $1 million is 100 of those stacks, and they would lie comfortably at your feet. You wouldn't really notice them. What I'm showing you here is $100 million, again on a pallet. When you look at $1 billion, now you're looking at many pallets. And when you're thinking about $1 trillion, which is a million millions, that's a visual of what it can look like. And the reason I put it up is that it is a staggeringly large field when you think about where you started with that first stack of hundreds. But it gives you some context of why it's so overwhelming and daunting for those of us who read the press. The second reason why there's significant amount of feeling of being overwhelmed by families is not only the press and the huge numbers we're talking about, but it's also the fact that a good amount of the information that's available is very, very difficult either to access or to understand and comprehend in a short period of time. So this, I just pulled out the FAFSA, and of course the FAFSA is the federal government's form that's required to be filled out in order to qualify for any financial aid, any federal-based financial aid, and that's grants, loans, through the federal government program. And their guide, just the guide itself, is 98 pages long. So when you think about why families are overwhelmed, there's a lot of information out there, but it's in a very not in a very compact form for the most part. So I want to just now start to turn the barge a little bit away from the negative media and all of the information and the issues about why we're confused and overwhelmed, and start talking about some of the solutions. Because I think when you look at the reality, it's not nearly as difficult as the perceptions might be. So here are a few myth busters for you. Perception does not equal reality for many families. If you ask parents the cost of college, they often overestimate the net cost. Again, not the sticker price, but the net cost they'll actually pay by about 200%. They'll overestimate, about half people overestimate the amount of required loan payment by at least 50%. About 34% of the cost of education in the last academic year was actually funded through scholarships and grants, that free money that I talked about earlier. And that's up from 30% a year ago. So the out-of-pocket costs that most families faced in 2015, 2016 were actually less than what they faced in 2014 and 2015. That's a statistic that's not very widely distributed. About 40% of undergraduates borrow nothing. We can see undergraduate borrowing estimates from 17,000 all the way up to 35,000. You have to be very careful about what statistic is actually being reported. But most undergraduates borrow somewhere, I'll say, in the $25,000 to $30,000 range is probably the midpoint of that average. The average 25 to 34-year-old is going to see a return on their bachelor's degree such that they'll earn $20,000 a year more than their high school graduate non-BA brethren. That's about $1 million over a lifetime, so there's no question that the investment in education pays off. And I talked to you earlier about the loans, less than $10,000 accounting for the majority of the defaults. The really scary thing is that the loan balance is less than $5,000 or 35% of defaults. And if you look at the other end, greater than $40,000 in loans account for about 7% of all defaults. So again, completion is a key, and ensuring that the first year's salary exceeds total debt is also a key. So what I hope you take away from this is that the majority of students are like BU students. They land on their feet, but the noisy minority really gets a good part of the press. So now we'll move toward where we turn for help. I'm going to go through this very quickly. Again, kudos to Boston University. They have a Smart Money 101 campaign, which is financial literacy for students. They have workshops, and they really try to teach students to make smart financial decisions while they're at school, and again, to try to set them up to be good payers when they leave, and obviously that's working well. Also, the Alumni Association and the admissions office has resources available. There are also many online resources. I'm just going to take 1 minute to give you the commercial for Invite Education, which is we are an online college planning and paying platform. It allows you to set up your family so you can see each child individually and the family holistically. And we provide our content in what we call a snackable format. So if you come on and ask for the FAFSA, you're going to get a few very quick pieces of information instead of the 98-page guide. We also have the ability to answer the two questions we talked about. Can the child get in, and can we afford it, through our college search engines, scholarship search engines, and this Family and Student Financial Center, which gives you precise information about what the costs are, and you can put your own information in about your savings to get to that equation. And of course, the book. So that's the high level of what's out there. There are resources at the school. There are resources online. There are resources, of course, in the guidance office in the high school. That is often the very first place to stop when you're trying to gather up all of the information, tools, and services that you'll need. I often get the question with regard to when should families begin to start their savings? And the answer to that is right now or yesterday. And the two flavors of questions usually come at me and they say, well, wait, my kids are very young, they're just born, or I have other things that I need to do with childcare. Why should I start saving now when I'm not going to face these costs for another 18 years? It's too early to start saving. On the other side of that, some parents and perhaps some of you on the phone have thought, well, unfortunately, we're not able to save, and now I have a sophomore or a junior in high school, and it's really too late. And my view, and what we talk about in the book extensively, is that it's never too early, and it's never too late. The reason it's not too early, obviously, is that for the Questrom grads out there, you may know the rule of 70 is the rule of 68, or whatever it might be, but it's the question of how long does it take to double your money. So if you have a 1% growth rate, it'll take you 70 years to double your money. But the reality is that most plans, even in the difficult economic times when returns weren't as great, and when we talk about returns, we're talking about interest plus appreciation. So many college savings plans were returning anywhere from 3 to 5 or so percent, some of them on a tax-exempt basis. But if you're in that sweet spot between 4 and 5.5%, what this chart shows is that it's going to take you anywhere from about 12.5 to about 17.5 years to double your money. So starting young obviously helps getting that compounding effect as you go. The other very important point for those with younger children is that by delaying the beginning of a savings plan, you have to try to catch up with significantly increased amounts as time goes by. Both of these charts are in the book, The Plan and Finance Your Family's College Dreams, but I did want to bring it up to say that it's important for families to save even just a small amount, $25 or $50 a month or whatever a budget might bear, such that you're able to take advantage of that compounding effect over time. The question then comes as to which savings plans actually really work the best. And there are many options to save for college. In the next few slides, I will provide an overview. If you have any questions, please ask them, and we'll try to answer them toward the end. But the options for saving for college, the Coverdell education savings accounts are quite good. The issue is that they do have an income restriction of $110,000, and there's a $2,000 contribution limit per year. But this works well for some families in that socioeconomic strata. So this is a really good way to save, available at banks or at credit unions. And the really interesting piece is that for the Coverdales, you're able to use those monies for both secondary and post-secondary education. Of course, you can always go and buy savings bonds or use your savings and brokerage accounts, the taxable accounts as savings. There are also some life insurance products, annuities that are available that some use. Others talk about using Roth IRAs as a way to save, and of course, they do allow you to make those contributions after tax, and distributions are tax-free as long as they're taken after age 59 and a half, and the early withdrawal penalties are waived for qualified educational expenses. But there is one significant fly in the Roth IRA ointment when you talk about saving for college, and that is that when you make those IRA distributions, it's considered income and will reduce the financial aid eligibility. So unlike some of the other programs that would not be considered income, the Roth IRA distributions would be considered income and will have an effect on financial aid. So you need to be careful with that. I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about the 529 college savings plans. The 529 college savings plans have evolved as really the program of choice for college savers. There are no income or age restrictions and very favorable gifting. You can gift up to $14,000 per year per person with an allowance for 5 years of acceleration. So a family of means could put away $140,000 right at the very beginning, or bring that in over time. But again, very significant favorable gifting provisions. The account is not part of the estate, but the owner maintains control of that. So I had a 529 set up for each Allison and Emily. That was not considered part of my estate, but I did have the ability to control those distributions and also to control the investments. Many times the 529 programs, and there are great programs here in Massachusetts and across the country. MIFA has the U Plan and the U Fund, which is prepaid, and the savings programs. But these programs often have age-based portfolios, so I can just put the money in and allow that money to grow over time on a tax-deferred basis. It's also tax-free distribution as long as they're used for qualified educational expenses. And the qualified educational expenses, basically everything having to do with going to college: tuition, room, board, fees, computers, that sort of thing. I also have the benefit with a 529 of a professional investment management. And I'm also able to move those beneficiaries, switch the beneficiaries. So when Allison completed her college, I had a few dollars left in her 529. I was able to take that money and redesignate the beneficiary to my younger daughter. You can actually designate yourself as the new beneficiary and perhaps save that for a grandchild or someone else. And also there's flexibility to use those monies after the undergraduate education has been paid for to pay for graduate school itself. So the 529s have really emerged as the leading way for families to save for college. This graph shows that. There are about a little over $250 billion worth of 529 plan assets now saved across all savers. So again, a very significant and terrific program created by the United States Congress back in the mid-1990s. I have to say my co-founder at Invite Education and co-author of the book, Dr. Peter Mazareas, was at MIFA at that time and helped found the 529 college savings business in the United States and brought those programs to MIFA. So our team at Invite Education is very deeply steeped both in the loan business when it comes to college paying, but also in the savings business. We're getting near the end of our time. We have about 5 minutes or so, and I'll begin to take some questions. But I did want to take some time to discuss the two college application processes in a little bit more detail. And that is, how should families navigate the two processes, both admissions and financial aid? When we think about this question, And we talk about this in the book and also in the grade-by-grade guidance at inviteeducation.com. Starting in the earliest years, we talk about savings, but when we get into the middle school years, we start talking about helping your students define their aptitudes and interests as a way of laying the foundation for a really successful high school career that will bring us to a successful college career as well. Many people ask me, well, when should we really start this admissions process? Is this a junior year activity? And I say no. I believe that the first day of the ninth grade, not to scare the ninth graders trying to deal with the new building and all the rest of it, but the first day of the ninth grade, the reality is the clock is starting to tick toward college. And when you think about it and step back and have some perspective, the reality is you don't have 4 years from the ninth grade to put your college application together. You're going to be in college in 4 years. You really have about 2.5 years to lay out that groundwork to really establish the foundation for that application. So astute parents are helping their children in an appropriate way realize that it really is game on beginning the first day of the ninth grade. Have a plan. Understand what's going to take to be considered a well-rounded student by the college when you're going to apply for those schools just 3 years down the line. And so what are the schools looking for? They want, obviously, some indication with some quantitative measures. What's the GPA? What's the class rank? How have you done on the exams? Which exams have you taken? Some schools now are beginning to de-emphasize some of the exams like the ACT and the SAT. Others still require them. For the most selective schools, sometimes SAT subject tests or advanced placement exams are required, or maybe not formally required, but certainly are a significant help. So clearly it's good to have an understanding of that very early in the high school career, what will be required. Also, it's a great time to start to define interest in leadership so that when that question comes up on the college application of what have you done, the better answer is I've been interested in this since about the 9th or 10th grade, and this is how my interests have evolved. Colleges are less, I'll say that they will favor students who have deeper interest in some leadership than a laundry list of activities that they started to participate in late sophomore, early junior year. Obviously, community service helps a lot. And also, the students, by the time they're writing their essays, the junior summer into senior year, they're really defining who they are. And they have to realize, and as parents, we realize that students are, in effect, marketing themselves to the school. They are packaging their talents, and it comes together in that application process. The other point we like to make in the early high school years is that it's great to expose students to college campuses, either coming on campus to see a sporting event or going to the theater or just walking around, perhaps while you're on vacation or during a holiday break, but just starting to expose early high school students to the different fields of college campuses will help them significantly. The admissions process itself is actually very straightforward. Again, in 2011 and 12, when we first started thinking about this, I realized that when you boil it down, it's not complicated. What becomes complicated is the emotion that runs through this process. But at the end of the day, you really have to just fill out an application, either the Common App. Some schools use the Universal App or the Consortium. Some have their own, but most schools, particularly the large private universities, are using the Common App. You have to have the student obviously have a high school transcript. They need to take those tests. Then they have to think about what letters of recommendation will support their application and help tell their story through that application of who they are and what's important to them. During the junior year, summer into early senior year, they're writing the essays and their personal statements. And then it's also important to understand whether or not a school requires or prefers or has really no view of the interview. Some have admission staffs who conduct the interviews. Other schools really take alumni as their primary interviewers. So just understanding this process early on will help you navigate it as you move through the high school career. Now, with regard to navigating the financial aid process, the most important thing that we like to tell people is make sure that you understand the deadlines and understand the process. So the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, is available online, and it is absolutely required to receive any federal aid. And what that form does, and it's now available, I have to say, starting October 1, which is a little bit of a change for those of you with seniors in high school. Last year, the class, it was available Jan 1, but now it's available on October 1st, so it's available right now at FAFSA.gov. It's really important to have that filled out as soon as possible in the process, again, to be eligible for any kind of federal aid. Many private schools like Boston University also require the CSS profile to be eligible for institutional aid. The two kinds of aid that are generally available for families are need-based aid, and that's usually a formula calculation done from the FAFSA or the profile. Or you may be eligible, your student may be eligible for merit-based aid. And this comes another one of those common questions says, well, I make way too much money, so we're not going to be eligible for any financial aid. That may be true on a need-based basis, but it could also be true that your student has a particular talent that a college wants. And sometimes when we talk about merit aid, it's just not being a star athlete or being the lead in the play or being a great debater. It might be something as simple as the school wants to fill out a class with geographical diversity. I know a girl from the Northeast who was accepted at schools in southern Texas, out in Southern California, and in the cornfields of Indiana, and she got merit-based aid, I think predominantly because of the geographical diversity. They just didn't have a lot of girls from the Northeast who were applying, and they wanted this girl in her class. So the old Cy Sims, you can't win if you don't play, that's the New York State Lottery, you can't win if you don't play, logo is really important when you're thinking about applying for aid as well. It's a process and it's worth playing. If you turn out to be unsuccessful in the aid or you don't get enough aid and you have some unmet need, then understanding your loan options is really important. The federal loans, again, come through this FAFSA process. All students are eligible for loans. There are no income restrictions on loans from the federal program. There are two kinds of federal loans, really. One for students on a subsidized basis. Those are for lower earners. And what that means is that the family has an income below what the cutoff might be. And the federal government will actually pay the interest for those loans while the student's in school. The other flavor of federal student loans is an unsubsidized loan, which means that the family, the student, is responsible for either paying that interest while in school or capitalizing it, meaning adding it to the balance. So understanding what kind of federal loan the student is eligible for, either subsidized or unsubsidized, is very important. The other point here is that the federal loans are capped. The amount that the student can borrow in each freshman and sophomore year, junior and senior year are all capped. So freshmen and sophomores can borrow $5,500, juniors can borrow $6,500, and seniors can borrow $7,500 from the government. This government also has a program called the Federal Plus Loan, which I have to flash in red with warning saying to be careful of this loan because it is often packaged as aid in the financial aid award letter, even though it's a loan. And what this loan allows is for parents with almost no credit check to borrow up to the full cost of attendance. So again, I sort of flash red when I talk about plus loans because it looks like an easy way to afford college when in fact it's a loan which could be troublesome down the line. For families that exceed the cap on the federal loans or they don't want to file the FAFSA paperwork, they can go to private credit loans. This is lenders, banks. Sometimes we see investment companies or financial services companies such as Sallie Mae or Discover or some of the others with their loan products. Also, credit unions have private credit student loans. So the takeaways from that I hope you were able to gather from this webinar is that you can build a solid plan for higher education for your student by having open and honest discussion with your child about some of the issues that we talked about, particularly with regard to affordability. We want to make sure that they understand that it's up to them to decide what school they're going to go to, but our participation is really important as parents because many times we're either footing the bill or substantially helping. And also starting a savings plan early is very helpful. The earlier the better. But also for those families who are starting later, a dollar saved is better than a dollar borrowed. I'd rather earn the interest in my bank account or get this appreciation than have to pay interest down the line. So even if you have a junior or senior in high school right now, you're going to have costs 4 or 5 years down the road. That little bit you're able to save now will help defer some of those costs and reduce the amount of debt that students will take. And then for students, I would really advise them when they do take on college debt, only borrow the amount that's necessary. Pay that student loan interest while you're in school. That will have a very significant help in reducing the amount of total payments you make on those loans. And then also select a student loan repayment plan that fits your economic circumstance. And when the time comes, tell your students that they should explore loan consolidation or refinancing options for those loans over the period of their schooling. So I appreciate everyone's participation today. I hope that you were able to get some tips on how to navigate this process, some food for thought about hopefully how to talk to your students about affordability or some of the big issues that you're facing with high school students. And also, I hope that you'll have an opportunity to give us some feedback on what we've done at Invite Education, inviteeducation.com, or the book. Please feel free to contact us at Invite Education or myself, John Hupalo, at inviteeducation.com, on LinkedIn or at Twitter. So Sarah, thank you very much to you again and your colleagues at Boston University. It was a great pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and I look forward to taking any questions you might have gathered.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate all of this information. We do have some questions already. And anyone else who has one, go ahead and type your question into the chat box at the bottom of the screen. And I'll actually make it a little bit bigger so I can see all the questions. So Rich has a question. Should grandparents that are saving for college in their own 529 plan transfer the funds to a 529 account in the parent's name, which is best to not affect financial aid?
That's a great that's a great question. Thank you. Grandparents are actually significant contributors now to their grandchildren's education. We're seeing a lot of generation skipping where monies are being made available to the grandparent. To answer the question directly, switching to the parent or the grandchild as a beneficiary is one way to go about that. I think the questioner is on to an important point, which is a grandparent which makes a 529 withdrawal for a grandchild, that could be considered as income for that grandchild in that year and could reduce their eligibility. Anecdotally, I've never heard of any school actually doing that or students having an issue with that, but technically that's exactly right. So the advice, because of the way the data is gathered for the FAFSA form, is for grandparents to make those distributions in either the junior or senior year of the student's college career. And the reason for that is that the FAFSA form is now using what's known as the prior tax year as the basis. So students who are entering college in 2017, they're using the tax year 2015 data for their form. So there's that little lag there. So that's a great question. I think the 529 grandparents with 529s either make distributions late in the college or switch the beneficiary. It gets to the same place.
Great. Vicky would like to know if there's a place to see projections of college costs in the future. For example, if her child would be in the college class of 2024 or 2026.
Yeah, that's a terrific question. I hate to have a commercial for Invite Education, but at inviteeducation.com, we have exactly those kind of calculators. But you can also find them for free. The College Board is a good data source. There are other places on the web where you can put that in. One of the opportunities that we make available to our users on our system is that you can put in your own assumed inflation rates for the college costs and project that out over time. And in the financial centers that I showed you earlier, it allows you to see each child individually with the school choices that they're making, as well as all of the children together, so in one snapshot. But yes, there are free tools available online, and there are other resources as well.
Pam noted that you have to apply for financial aid every year. What happens if you don't get the same aid year after year? Are there any options that your child can stay and finish their degree?
Yeah, that is another great question. It's critical that students and families continue to file that FAFSA form for each year in order to maintain their aid. If you don't file the form, you won't get the aid. So it's critical to file the FAFSA and the profile forms if they're required by the school each year. The other point that she notes, which is excellent, is that it's critical, absolutely critical for families to know what aid they've received in their financial aid award letter. Is that aid for all 4 years? Is that a 1-year scholarship? And while I'm talking about the financial aid award letter, it's absolutely essential to understand what I mentioned or alluded to, which is how much is free money, that's grants and scholarships that don't have to be repaid, how much is earned, meaning work study, and then how much in that aid letter may it be attributable to loans. And one last kudo to Boston University Financial Aid. They use the Department of Education shopping sheet, which really makes that very clear to recipients of aid at Boston University of what it is. Is it free aid? Is it earned aid? Or is it loan? So I think that's a terrific question, Pam. Thank you for that.
Angela has a question about outside scholarships. She said, does the university simply deduct that from the financial bucket, resulting in a zero-sum gain?
Yes, boy, our BU crowd is on the technical points. That is correct. That there can be dollar for dollar reductions in aid, and again, it depends on the university and the circumstances. But third-party scholarships can have a negative effect on a financial aid award package. And again, all these questions that we're talking about, and I've just given answers to. We talk about in a lot more detail in the book, Plan and Finance Your Family's College Dreams. There are pages on all of this.
We have a comment and followed by a question. I was advised by a financial planner that it is better to pay for schooling in the elementary school years instead of saving for college because there are more opportunities for scholarships and grants in college years. Is that good advice?
I'm sorry, Sarah, the middle part I didn't hear. I understand it's about scholarships and seems the difference between early years and later years, but I didn't hear the middle part of what you said.
Is it better rather than to save for college during elementary years? Is it better to pay for elementary school schooling rather than start saving for college at that point because there will be opportunities later for scholarships?
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is the question about scarce dollars. Do I put it toward my secondary education? Do I put them toward retirement, or do I put them toward college savings? There's a myth that if you save for college, you're not going to do as well in the financial aid process. That's a myth that needs to be debunked. The reality is that saving for college is a good investment. When you look at the FAFSA form and some of the CSS profile forms, the significant inputs come from income, and there are equations about how much of savings is actually used, how much of a family's savings are actually used for their expected family contribution. So families, parents who have large asset bases, it's assumed that 5.64% of those assets would be available in the EFC calculation, the expected family contribution calculation. So saving, again, is usually for almost as a rule a better plan than to hope that when the student gets to college that the financial aid office will be generous or somehow some other ability to pay for that college will present itself. But savings really is a foundation for choice for most students.
Great. Thank you so much, John. We do have a few more questions that I don't think we're going to have time to get to because we did hit our 1 p.m. mark. But John has very generously offered his contact information there for those of you who just had a couple more questions. And I want to invite all of you to participate in future webinars that we have. John already mentioned that my colleagues in this office who work on career programming, you can go to their website. There's lots of resources there for alumni and others. And we do offer career webinars every month. Our next educational webinar actually happens next week. It's for parents of students with special needs. And then on November 9th, we have another alum who's presenting. Her talk is titled Tomb Raiders and Terrorist Financing, Cutting Off the Illicit Traffic in Blood Antiquities. If you're interested in either one of these webinars, you can go to bu.edu/alumni/events and check out our calendar. John, let me thank you one more time for everything that you've shared with us today. I appreciate it so much.
You're welcome, Sarah, and thank you all for joining.
Yes, thank you all. Have a great day.